welcome to New Week, Monday, April 6, 2026. Been waiting to do this for a long time. This will keep us busy for another week or so. Again, my name is Mark Kulak, KULACZ. My show is this program is Houstonic.live. It is a program, for lack of a better word, it tends to fall under the category of a podcast. I'm not really a podcaster, though, but I'm podcasting. I am an analyst. I did work as a competitive intelligence analyst as well as an engineer in the big tech data storage industry. I live up in the northeastern part of the United States of America. And as a program which is here for updates and providing of content related to a long trajectory of research and analysis and data collection, data archival. It's not always, the panic and the hysteria of the day, which we are relaying here. In fact, the more the program, if you're following another program, follows the hysteria of the day. Look, I subscribe to a lot of programs that follow the hysteria of the day. I get it. But if you're always following the hysteria, then that's what you're doing, because that's a full-time job. The reason why the cat never stops following the laser pointer is because the cat never takes a day off and go, okay, let's try to figure out what's really going on here. It will never end. And at some point, you have to go, you know what? It's been days, weeks, months, years, decades even. At some point, you have to go, you know what? If you don't follow the panic and the hysteria and the laser pointer of the day, tomorrow's still going to happen. It's still going to happen. So you can allow yourself time to turn it off. Turn it off, because clearly getting caught up in always following the laser pointer and never taking a moment to try to figure out where it's being projected from isn't getting anywhere. You're allowed to take time off. In fact, I think the laser pointer and the hysteria is there precisely to discourage and prevent people who are taking some time to try to figure out, okay, obviously there's some weird stuff going on in the world right now, from getting anywhere. Because the moment you take a few moments of your life, or you take some time out of your life, or a period of time out of your life to turn on online media to figure out what is going on, you're immediately met with absolute chaos. It is a portal to hell. There's like a scene. I'm sorry. I'm not a very graphic person as far as stuff that I talk about on my show. But there's a scene from the movie, a late 1990s sci-fi horror movie, Event Horizon. Okay, where they create this machine which allows for deep space travel, folding of time, and accidentally, I guess, one of the realms that this machine was able to enter was going to hell and back. So they have a scene in there where it's just, you get a moment in time, you just see hell. And it's just horror. There's blood and things are being cut up and people are being tortured and put on hooks and cut and there's screaming, and it is just extreme, full blast violence every second. And it's like that's what it feels like when you go to Twitter right now. You're just like, la 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 la, picking some flowers, nice breakfast, life is good. You just took the dog out, and then you turn on Twitter, and it's like, ah! And you just turn it off. You're like, whoa, what was that? It's like, it's a gateway to hell. It is a gateway to hell. So you don't need that, okay? And I discourage people from getting too caught up in that. Today's current thing. Yeah, it is a gateway to hell. It's awful. It shouldn't need to be like that. I'm sorry for the scream, but I needed to emphasize what it's like to turn on or to look at my Rumble feed. Everything's good, you work on your carpentry. It's like, hey, it looks like spring is coming. Maybe we should put, get the grass going. It's like, oh, it's okay. And then I won't do it again. I won't repeat it again. But it's just, you look at the feed, it's just, whoa, what's going on here? Anyways, I'm not here to put on that type of blast, okay? And look, I'll be the first person to tell you, there's some tough stuff happening. some awful things which aren't getting the visibility that they need to be stopped, and they're still happening. I'll be the first person to tell you. But soaking yourself in it all the time is not going to. Here's the thing, okay? The worst things that are happening can't get any visibility. That's one of the wonders of online media right now. The worst things happening get no visibility at all. Instead, there's even more nightmarish things which really aren't happening, which are being screamed. It is a gateway to hell. So, I'm restarting a series, and the series here is a book. And let me give a quick introduction to the book. It's called Big Shot AIDS Vaccine. Subtitle, Passion, Politics, and the Struggle for an AIDS Vaccine. It was written by Patricia Thomas. The book was published not just in 2001. They are absolutely still ignored, Vilma. The drug overdose deaths in the United States of America are still being ignored. I don't even know what they are this year. Let's put it this way, okay? I know people who have lost two children to overdoses, have raised grandchildren because of the situation, have worked with state and even federal governments for recognition with mixed success, and are getting ready to stop their efforts. And you know why? Because at some point you realize you're not going to live much longer. You only got so many days left. The more you try to get back what's taken from you, the more that just keeps going out the door, is the famous phrase, right? You got to get a tourniquet on it. And that awareness that there are people who have lost two children to drug overdoses, who have given so much for evangelism and are getting ready to quit, that should weigh very heavily on you, because they have given everything and they have to get back to life at some point, whatever life they have left. And how is it possible that there are other people that have been doing this conspiracy research and whatever for 5, 10, 20, 25 years and have gotten nowhere? Alex Jones, for example, the InfoWars program, on September 11th, 2001, was talking about biological weapons. On September 11th, 2001. 25 years later, they have made no progress and are still going and asking you to buy their vitamins. And I think that's all the evidence you need that their job is not to help you. Oh, by the way, I'd like to... hello, Pete. Hello, Vilma. Shimmer, Czar. Hey, hello, Czar. This book, Big Shot AIDS Vaccine, it was published, and the publication date I consider to be the date that's available for sale, September 16th, 2001, or September 17th. It was 7 days after 9/11, which means the book was written over the course of 3 to 4 years before September 11th, 2001. And a lot of energy was put into that specific release date, that date available for purchase, which means the date that this book was hitting the printers was throughout July and August of 2001. This book precedes 2001. Now, I'd like to be sure that other people don't mince words here, okay? I think that simply repeating and rehashing what other people have written in general can be a huge waste of time. But what matters are things which are written before events, not cleanup after events, before events. So this book is basically a pre-9/11 book. And the book is about the HIV vaccine, or a potential HIV or AIDS vaccine. That's what the book is about, Patricia Thomas. It comes out on basically before 9/11. And one of the main characters in the book, one of the main characters in this book, is a scientist named Nancy Hagwood, Higwood. And Nancy Hagwood is the person that made a phone call to the FBI as late as 2006 to say, you know what, I knew a guy back in college or something like that who made me feel uncomfortable. He stole my notebook, and I think he could have done the anthrax letters. She basically is the person that dropped the dime on Bruce Ivins. Bruce Ivins is a scientist who worked at USAMRIID, United States Army Research Institute for Infectious Diseases, and died allegedly by committing suicide after being accused of being the anthrax letter mailer. So he stole it from the lab and sent out the letters. That's the story. That remains the official narrative. This book that came out basically on 9/11, before 9/11, was when it was written, and therefore everything in this book is unimpacted by 9/11. The main person in this book and it covers a lot of people, is Nancy Haygood, is the person who said Bruce Ivins did it. Now, the other remarkable part about this book, which is why I'm reading it, is that it goes into Nancy Haygood's backstory a little bit. Makes no mention of ever knowing of Bruce Ivins. Bruce Ivins isn't in this book at all. But this book provides evidence that Nancy Haygood, the person who called the FBI in the year 2006, said that Bruce Ivins made her feel uncomfortable back in college, could be the anthrax letter mailer, okay? There's evidence provided in this book that that person, Nancy Haygood, knew Robert Malone since 1989. Which means that this book suggests, if you have an open mind, that Robert Malone flirted with a woman that he knew back in 1989 and asked her to do him a favor to call the FBI and create a backstory on Bruce Ivins. Because I believe it's possible. Now, it says 2002, Peter, but here's the thing, Peter, okay? The documents say 2002, but there's no hard evidence that she ever called the FBI until 2006. In fact, I think the story of her having called the FBI is in and of itself a mythology. I think that they needed someone to suggest why they thought Bruce Ivins did it. And I believe Robert Malone helped create that backstory. I believe Robert Malone already knew of Bruce Ivins through other intermediaries at USAMRIID, including Sina Bavari, a Dr. Sina Bavari, who 20-something years later is the person that provided us a document that suggested remdesivir was going to work for a deadly novel coronavirus that came out of a laboratory or out of a cave somewhere in China, causing a global pandemic before COVID-19. So Robert Malone, sadly enough right now, is being seen as some of the hero of the resistance and Maha and everything else. But I believe he's an instrumental person in understanding 9/11. I believe Dr. Robert Malone, the horse farmer, Dr. Robert Malone, is an instrumental person in understanding 9/11. He was the person who was asked to set up all the IT infrastructure in a cancer research laboratory in Windber, Pennsylvania, which was a repurposed hospice care center just a few miles away from where Flight 93 definitely did not crash. A center which was the only center of excellence for the United States military in the year 2000 and 2001 for cancer research for the United States Army Walter Reed Hospital, and a center which would have been the one place which would have collected all the data on increasing cancer rates in the U.S. military should there have been an experimental DNA anthrax vaccine mandated to be used by the U.S. military in a response to a biological terror attack in a major U.S. metropolitan centers such as New York City. And it's too bad that people are unwilling to effectively discuss this. Instead, they take money to put in their fanny packs to protect Robert Malone or to say nice things about Robert Malone, or if they do suggest something negative about Robert Malone, it's something that's misleading or incorrect. This book provides evidence that Robert Malone was involved in either the cover-up to the anthrax attacks or possibly, even worse, had inside knowledge at the time of the anthrax attacks and the source of the alleged anthrax powder. He was, after all, at the time of 9/11, working with a married couple, one of them which went to University of Scranton in Pennsylvania, which is the third potential site of the source of the anthrax powder. The other person was a Daryl Galloway, who we also knew, who worked at Ohio State University, whatever it is, in Columbus, Ohio, also receiving plasmids from Vical Corporation, where Robert Malone had worked, with support funding from Battelle. And I think that's one of the reasons why all of the same people that are unwilling to provide any useful criticism of Robert Malone, such as Whitney Webb, are also working full steam 100% of the time to suggest that Leslie Wexner out of Columbus is some pedophile Satanist working with Jeffrey Epstein. That is why Robert Malone is still one of the most important people to be critical of all the time. And everything I just said, by the way, aside from very easy to make conjectures based upon all that evidence, is in the archive that I have for Robert Wallace Malone. You can look it up for yourself. It's all there. Setting up the laboratory with Richard Verma, who went on to become the United States ambassador to India and the number 2 at the United States State Department under Hillary Clinton. It's all there. It also involves several people, associates of Robert Malone, who tragically died young. All right, so let's just get it started here. You can get it online. You can go to HoustonTonicITS.com or HoustonTonic.live. The preface. It's all available online. It's the only scanned-in digital copy that you can get out there. There is no narrated copy available. They won't offer it on Amazon. In the beginning, the search for an AIDS vaccine was essentially a cottage industry. Individuals and small groups of scientists with limited budgets and ambitious ideas explored many different vaccine approaches in small labs dotted around the world. This was the mid-1980s, when the human immunodeficiency virus had just been identified as the cause of this frightening and fatal new disease. During those years, I was a young reporter, this is Patricia Thomas, a young reporter living in Atlanta and writing about medicine for publications read mainly by doctors. Most of the news stories that I wrote about AIDS included a refrain that went something like this, quote, "Because the disease is fatal and there is no treatment, a preventative vaccine is the only real hope against the epidemic," unquote. Nearly 20 years later, treatments are available, mostly for insured people in wealthy countries, but still no vaccine has proved that it can keep anyone in the world safe from AIDS. Treatments moved faster than vaccines for a variety of scientific, social, and economic reasons. The AIDS virus was identified in early 1984, and within a year, scientists had figured out how to determine whether a given chemical could kill it in a test tube. This opened the door to drug discovery by enabling major pharmaceutical companies to sort through their vast chemical libraries, pick out compounds that might have virus-killing potential, and test them in the lab. The most promising of these were rushed into clinical trials, and by the end of the year 1985, about half a dozen were being given to small numbers of volunteers. Clinical testing expanded in response to top activists who demanded that the government and industry go all out to help the soaring number of people who were dying terrible, highly publicized deaths from AIDS. Not only was AIDS a genuine public health emergency, but pharmaceutical companies could see that these treatments would be a very lucrative business. And because the disease itself was so frightening and lethal, they surmised that patients would tolerate toxic side effects if a medication helped keep them alive. AZT, the first antiviral drug against AIDS, was approved in the year 1987. Even though it was only partly effective and was plagued by adverse effects. Other drugs followed, although not until 1996 did research show the superiority of a multi-drug cocktail built around a new class of drugs called protease inhibitors. The hoopla surrounding this good news persuaded many people that AIDS has become just another chronic disease, as manageable as high blood pressure. While it would be comforting to think that AIDS is a thing of the past, Clearly, this is not true. The World Health Organization estimates that 36.1 million people are infected with HIV. Every day, nearly 15,000 previously healthy men, women, and children contract the virus, a figure that is soaring as the disease gathers momentum in China and India, the world's most populous nations. In South Africa, 1 in 4 adults already carries HIV. The spread of AIDS is fueled by poverty, inequality, and instability, both political and economic. Most of its victims are poor people who live in developing countries where HIV infection goes undetected until they come down with the terrible symptoms of AIDS. And by then, they have inadvertently infected their loved ones. Once they do become sick, more than 95% of the world's AIDS patients will die without ever being treated with the antiviral drugs that have made life so much better and longer for infected people in the industrialized world. Although international political pressure has recently caused some pharmaceutical companies to cut the price of anti-HIV drugs in the developing world, most public health authorities admit that this is, quote, too little, too late. It's too late, baby, now it's too late. The global AIDS pandemic is not going to slow, much less stop, until we have a safe, effective, affordable vaccine. Unfortunately, vaccines are not to be found in the storerooms of drug manufacturers. A vaccine is a biological product, not a chemical, and each vaccine must be custom made to protect against a specific disease. Narrators know, I don't remember this first time I read this book, but because we are learning. I used to believe in Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, RNA pandemics, and nuclear weapons. But my understanding of things evolves over time. That's because I'm a thinking person. I don't claim to have had it all right in the past. Matter of fact, that would be the stupidest thing anyone could possibly say. They knew everything already when they were born. That's the stupidest thing anyone could say. Immediate disqualification if somebody says they already knew everything years or decades ago. Immediate disqualification. And here, what we learned is vaccines used to be made with animal byproducts. They came from horses and pigs and chickens and eggs. It's basically like going to the dairy aisle. Vaccines were considered almost a food product, a living product, a biological and not a chemical. Thus, vaccine quality control was not covered by the FDA for ages because it was in a different department, a department of biologics. It was basically like over there in the dairy aisle with making sure that the milk and the cheese were safe. And then over here, you have the ibuprofen and the Tylenol. This is important to understand. It's a big part of history that people have forgotten about. And the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, was like, okay, so, all of these advances through genetics are being established through the study of the biologics, but biologics are over here, and then you got the chemicals over here. So there was a lot of controversy throughout the FDA amendments and so on, FDA having oversight into the Department of Biologics throughout the 1960s and the 1970s in the United States of America. We had a bunch of shows about this where we learned about it together because we weren't born knowing all this stuff. And I'm so proud that we didn't know these things in the past, but we know them now. I love looking at old videos where I didn't know these things because it shows that we've learned things. Just restart the paragraph. Unfortunately, vaccines are not to be found in the storerooms of drug manufacturers. A vaccine is a biological product, not a chemical, and each vaccine must be custom made to protect against a specific disease. Even though there are many different strategies for designing vaccines, scientists realized early on that protecting people against HIV was going to be very difficult indeed. When I, again, this is the author, set out to chronicle the search for an AIDS vaccine in early 1997, I expected to find a classic struggle between scientific ingenuity and an exceptionally wily microbe. But I was in for a surprise. Although the scientific challenges involved in making this particular vaccine are immense, I soon learned that this alone does not account for the absence of a vaccine. Social attitudes towards AIDS, careerism and timidity among bureaucrats, and corporate anxieties about profits and liability have all been roadblocks to vaccine research and development. Far from being a top priority for the scientific and industrial establishment, HIV vaccine research has been a kind of low-prestige backwater that never, until very recently, claimed more than 10% of federal spending on AIDS. Still, hundreds of scientists in dozens of laboratories around the world have worked on vaccines over the past 2 decades. Many more have made scientific discoveries that have advanced the quest, even though they set out to explore seemingly unrelated questions. This book, focuses on a subset of scientists, everyone around Robert Malone, by the way, minus Robert Malone, corporate executives, and civilian and military officials whose complex motivations best illustrate the triumphs and the frustrations of this long and complicated quest. Some of them are heroes, some of them are not. So that is the introduction. So you can see this is actually a scan of my own book where I've written a few things in notes. I started off in each chapter or each section, writing down a list of names I needed to learn a little bit more about. Many of these names have pages in my archive on HoustonTonicITS.com or HoustonTonic.live. Just click on the little letters up above and everything's alphabetized. Because many of these individuals simply don't have any Wikipedia pages. I read this stuff better just knowing you're here, just knowing that you guys are listening to me. Yay, go Mark. It brings a little bit more zhuzh, if you will, to my reading. Hey, Subi, how you doing? Happy Easter again. Happy Easter to everyone. I had a weird Easter show yesterday. I have to admit, it stunk. I mean, it's a blessed day for me, not for everyone, but it stunk knowing that Easter was canceled and the baloney that was pushed out there during COVID about RNA pandemics and the vaccines. I think it's permanent. I think it's the rest of my life. There will be people whose relationship is permanently damaged. Not damaged, impacted. Let's just say impacted, okay? I'm not mad at them. I'm not mad at my friends and family. Most of the things that I hear myself saying these days, I would have thought would have been nothing short of insanity 10 years ago. Just because my life's journey took me down one path doesn't mean, and theirs hasn't yet, to their blessing, I suppose, I can't be mad at them. But I am mad at the people who continue to misdirect and misinform about what happened during COVID. So I will start here, and let's at least try to make it an hour. It's like 15 minutes. Paul Luciu. Now, Paul Luciu. The last name is spelled Luciw. I think the whole time I first read this, I said it differently. Paul Luciu was alone in his lab at Chiron Corporation. Chiron is spelled Chiron. The first time I read this, I pronounced it as Chiron, ridiculously. And I want to replace all the old recordings of this. So, Paul Luciu was alone in his laboratory at Chiron Corporation in Emeryville, California, on an August evening in the year 1984. Rush hour traffic on the nearby Nimitz Freeway had fallen to a dull rumble, and the technicians had gone home, and Paul relished the chance to work without any interruptions. Then the call came from Kathy Steimer, Steimer, Kathy Steimer, his closest colleague at the company. She said, "Paul, I've got a problem. The ultracentrifuge has stopped." Paul Luciu could picture exactly where Kathy Steimer, was, all alone in a spooky P3 containment facility, a place where dangerous microbes could be handled in an isolated, specially ventilated room. This lab, a part of the Navy Biosciences Laboratory, or NBL, was less than 2 miles from Chiron Corporation. All summer, Kathy and Paul had been loading this huge, heavy ultracentrifuge with samples of virus that doctors had isolated from AIDS patients in San Francisco. Like other teams of scientists in the United States and France, they were racing to unravel the genetic code of the virus and figure out how how this tiny killer is organized. Scientists put a premium on this information because it could open the door to diagnostic tests, treatments, or even a vaccine. When Kathy Steimer called, Paul Luciu's first thought was that the ultracentrifuge had thumped and bumped itself off balance like an overloaded washing machine, wreaking havoc with its contents while whirling at up to 20,000 revolutions per minute, or RPMs. If this had happened, whoever lifted the lid would find a jumble of metal racks and broken glassware coated with deadly viral goo. Fortunately, Kathy reassured him the situation wasn't as serious as that. The ultracentrifuge had simply ground itself to a halt while she was running a large preparation of virus. What troubled her was the prospect of filing an incident report, required any time something goes awry in a laboratory, with the central NBL office. Kathy and Paul had been cleared to work in the lab only because a Navy researcher who happened to be an old friend of Chiron's CEO, had lent surplus lab space to the company 3 months earlier. This made it possible for the fledgling biotech to work on the AIDS virus. At that point, the company hadn't finished building a place where dangerous organisms could be safely handled. As guests of a military facility working on a virus that terrified most people, the Chiron scientists had kept their heads down. As soon as Kathy finished talking to Paul, who agreed that they had to reveal what microbe was in the broken centrifuge, she called the duty officer for the Biosciences Lab, the Navy Biosciences Lab, again, the NBL. He immediately notified the commanding officer of the Oakland Naval Depot, where the laboratory was located, to report that there had been an accident with the AIDS virus on the base. The irate commander demanded to see Kathy in his office that night, not in the morning, but ASAP. If the base commander was so bent out of shape, what would happen to the viral cultures that she had spent all summer cajoling into lush growth? For all she knew, a hazardous waste disposal team was already hurtling in her direction, with instructions to confiscate the precious flasks. In a second quick phone consult, Kathy Steimer and Paul Luciu agreed that it made no sense to wait and see. Within minutes, Paul Luciu was on his bike, pedaling furiously from Chiron's headquarters in Emeryville, a down-at-the-heels industrial suburb of Oakland, to the Navy base. Paul was a short man, only a few inches over 5 feet tall, but fit in the way of one who shuns cars and walks or bikes wherever he goes. Once at the Navy depot, Paul showed his security pass to the armed guards at the gates and pedaled on to the P3 building, a forlorn structure near the base's edge. In the entry chamber, he stripped off his jeans and T-shirt and tossed them into a locker, pulling on a cotton scrub suit, gown, masks, booties, and latex gloves. As soon as Paul stepped into the ill-lit hallway, lined with derelict freezers and obsolete lab equipment, he began to sweat. His reaction was the same every time he saw the labels on the closed doors of individual labs. The hallway was a rogues gallery of pestilence, plague, anthrax, slow viruses that eat the brain. God knows what scourges had been handled in this old building and by whom. Sorry. The only room in use now, however, was the one where he and Kathy Steimer, had labored 14 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week since May. All the time, they had never seen another person in the corridor. Kathy Steimer had removed the contents of the ultracentrifuge and had lined up the T-150 flasks on the bench. By the way, if you don't mind my saying so, okay. Let's see here. By the way, just want to be clear about this, all right? If we go to the Houstonic.live site and we click on the L's, Luciw. I don't have pictures of him. But Paul Lu-Shu. Paul Lu-Shu is one of the 4 most frequent co-authors of a man named Murray Gardner. And Murray Gardner is the postdoc advisor of Robert Malone. Murray Gardner is also the man who, as legend has it, carried back a sample of HIV stolen from France HIV researchers in the 1980s. With Bob Gallo at his side, stole it from France, put it in aluminum foil in his pants pocket, brought it into the United States without disclosing it, and then used it as part of the announcement that they had isolated the HIV virus in the United States of America. Murray Gardner is the postdoc advisor of Robert Malone. He is also among the top co-authors of Paul Lu-Shu, who's the very first name mentioned in this book about an HIV vaccine that came out at the time of 9/11. Or I should say that they were working on 9/11. I will also tell you, again, most people don't know this, okay? But what was in the newspapers on the morning of 9/11? What was in the newspapers on the morning of 9/11? We click on the timeline. And again, I will improve this, okay, because I'm working on the Tiki-Toki timeline. I'm sorry. I will. This will get cleaned up as I repost this later on. But just to remind you, September 11th, 2001, while the planes were flying into the buildings, the U.S. newspapers had this. Do I have it here? Had this article on the columns. That's right. The HIV vaccine was announced on the morning of 9/11 by Bob Gallo. While everyone's watching the planes fly into the buildings. Now, to be fair, this story covers an announcement of the vaccine, which I think was a day or two earlier. It might have been over the weekend, but it was printed in U.S. newspapers on the morning of September 11th, 2001. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, in the columns of many U.S. newspapers was a story of the vaccine for HIV. This book, which came out on 9/11, basically, talks about an HIV vaccine. Very first name mentioned, Paul Lu-Shu, is one of the top, if not the top co-author of Murray Gardner, who is the postdoc advisor of Robert Malone. And it gets crazier because the other person in this book that it mentions, Nancy Hagewood, is the second most frequent co-author of Murray Gardner, who is still the postdoc advisor of Robert Malone. What are the odds that a book that comes out on 9/11 has one of the main names in it, the person that went to the FBI years later and said Bruce Ivins did the anthrax letters? What are the odds of that? It is the most magnificent coincidence which has happened in all of history. And it's just sitting there, waiting for people to talk about it and go, wow, that's incredible. What are the odds of that? Instead, we are dealing with something called the alternative media success paradox. I'm still working on a name on it, but that's the one I'm going with right now. The alternative media success paradox says that alternative media is where you get the real news. And that's why alternative media is censored. But alternative media is successful at getting hundreds of thousands of followers, if not millions of followers, which means alternative media is not censored. Meaning, the only way alternative media can be successful is if it's censored. And if it's not censored, it's not actually alternative media. You can't claim to have 100,000 or 1 million followers and say you're censored. You can't do it. So it's the alternative media success paradox. The only way you can prove that alternative media is effective is if it has a valuable message such as this and is censored. So I will never get those types of views or those number of subscribers precisely because it's real information. I'm not making this up. This isn't just me saying, "Hey, I know some people that you'll never meet. Some whistleblowers who are too scared and shit." This is the truth. These are facts. The research papers show it. Anyways, I just wanted to put it out there how stunning it is. And this book here also, the Big Shot AIDS vaccine, again, talks about John Wolfe, Gary Rhodes, and everybody that Robert Malone worked with. The book also talks about the isolation of the HIV vaccine, which, coincidentally, does tangentially involve Judy Mikovits. But this book won't mention Judy Mikovits because, like Robert Malone, Judy Mikovits is just in the shadows. You could see the outline of the hair and the hat and the toes sticking out from the flip-flops, but she's there. But you can't quite see her. Everyone around her is mentioned. She's not mentioned. Just the way this book. Everyone around Robert Malone is mentioned. Malone's not mentioned, though. It's really quite impressive. Anyways, sorry for the little tangent. I'm trying to highlight right up front why this book is so damning. It's a damning, but there's a reason why no one else highlights this book. Just like there's a reason why no one else highlights the Germs book. Everyone and their brother was talking about this on the day before 9/11, the day of 9/11, and the weeks after 9/11, but no one will mention its very existence right now. No one will mention it. Because you'll get more insights about 9/11 from this book than any other book that will ever be written. And only the original version, by the way, not the updated version. The original version, which, might I remind you, once again, by Judith Miller, Stephen Engelberg, and William Brogue. The very first sentence is, in the room, it was noon on September 9th, 1984. That was the attack. From its own preface, in December 1997, 6 years after the Persian Gulf War, the Pentagon announced that it had decided to vaccinate its 2.4 million soldiers and reservists against anthrax. And then the book goes on to talk about using technology out of the Human Genome Project and a DNA vaccine. The same technology which this book talks about. It's really quite remarkable. Anyways, going back here. Hello, Pete. How did Malone already know before 9/11 to keep his name out of these books? Malone was already working, by the way, with New York Times on narrative control. There was a young American, and this I think is a good tangent. It's a great question, Peter. There is a young American named Jesse Gelsinger who will open it up here, okay? We can go to Wikipedia. I think Wikipedia is fine, even though I do have a page for Jesse Gelsinger. This is Jesse Gelsinger. And Jesse Gelsinger died on September 17th, 1999. He is the first person publicly identified as having died in a clinical trial from gene therapy. The death of Jesse Gelsinger is a big part of the 9/11 narrative. Now, Jesse Gelsinger, he was only 18 years old. He suffered from a deficiency, I won't even try to pronounce it with respect, which is an X-linked genetic disease of the liver. The symptoms, which include inability to metabolize ammonia and a byproduct of protein breakdown. The disease is usually fatal at birth, but Gelsinger had a milder form in which, you can talk about the mutations. There was a trial run by the University of Pennsylvania that aimed at developing a treatment for infants born with a severe form of disease. On September 13th, 1999, Gelsinger was injected with an adenoviral vector carrying a corrected gene to test the safety of the procedure. He died 4 days later at the age of 18 on September 17th, apparently having suffered from a massive immune response triggered by the use of the viral vector to transport the gene into the cells. So he died of this experimental gene therapy, a technology which, by the way, also could have been used very easily for a vaccine. So let's go to the Houstonic ITS page here, because if we go to the G's, and if we go to the Jesse Gelsinger page, GEL, several thousand hours have been invested in organizing all of this content here. Let's see here. Was this the New York Times article? Yeah. New York Times reported on this several months later, despite ferment gene therapy progresses. New York Times had Robert Malone listed in it in the year 2000, before 9/11. Robert Malone approached the New York Times, or the New York Times approached him, and Robert Malone gave some bullshit about why it failed. But Jesse Gelsinger died of a product which was made by Vical Corporation, which is where Robert Malone worked. Now, after it was reported that Jesse Gelsinger died, they then discovered potentially one or two other deaths from trials involving the DNA adenovirus viral vector that they were using at Vical Corporation. The Vical plasmids were also being used, maybe a different variant of it, were also being used by Ohio State University and Darrell Galloway, receiving funding from Battelle Corporation. And this is part of the Project Jefferson stuff that indirectly connects to Leslie Wexner. So this is one of the reasons why you see Robert Malone and people around Robert Malone stirring up all this bullshit about Jeffrey Epstein. They're trying to disassociate the DNA vaccine work, which was happening at Columbus around the time of 9/11, to hang it somehow on a pedophile and a Satanist and Leslie Wexner and Victoria's Secrets, and get it away from Robert Malone. Because Robert Malone is part of the narrative control, everybody. Leslie Wexner, it wasn't just picked out of a hat. Leslie Wexner is a convenient billionaire being used to disassociate the DNA anthrax vaccine work at Ohio State University in Battelle from Robert Malone. Robert Malone brings Whitney Webb, the firecracker, to the Children's Health Defense Conference in 2022. Whitney Webb writes books about Jeffrey Epstein and Leslie Wexner. It's not a coincidence. That's not a relationship. It just happens coincidentally. So the trial about what happened with Jesse Gelsinger, about why he died, and this is where it goes from being bad to actually being much, 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 much worse, is if we go up to the V's, UVW, and hopefully I have this part here archive. If I don't, I will see. No, I may not have that. GEL. No, I don't have it here. Is when Jesse Gelsinger died. Okay. Upon Jesse Gelsinger's death, gosh darn it, I just closed the window accidentally. I didn't mean to do that. upon Jesse Gelsinger's death, there were hearings held about why he died accidentally. Those hearings were run by Inda Verma. The hearings about why Jesse Gelsinger died were run by the men that Robert Malone said gave him PTSD. The reason why Inda Verma was silenced in the year before COVID was because they couldn't risk having the guy who was this tied up in all this mess say anything off record. Inda Verma right now is back in India. He's been celebrated by Modi and by the Indian government, which means the Indian government has been this close to the narrative control going all the way back to 9/11. The lawyer that helped set up the Winburn Cancer Research Center that no one else will ever mention because most other researchers are fake, aside from Jonathan Cooey, he mentions Richard Verma. Richard Verma, I think, put a couple of tails onto Jonathan Cooey to throw him off the research track. Richard Verma from Johnstown, who was, I think, born in India. Richard Verma did the legal work. He then provided counsel to Harry Reid in Nevada, and he then went on to become the ambassador to India. So Richard Verma, the future ambassador to India, was working with Robert Malone back in 1999-2000. Inda Verma, who is celebrated by Modi of India, has been Robert Malone's boss going back to the 1990s. Robert Malone's postdoc advisor, Murray Gardner, his second most frequent co-author, Nancy Haygood, who went to the FBI to say that Bruce Ivins did the anthrax letters several years after 9/11. Robert Malone worked with the New York Times and Cheryl Gay Stolberg, a good friend of Judith Miller, before 9/11 regarding the death of Jesse Gelsinger, to said, it was just one of those things. Even though the technology for the DNA anthrax vaccine that was being worked on at Ohio State University with funding from Battelle Corporation, that they're using plasmids from Vical, which again goes back to Robert Malone. Vical Corporation was started by a man from India named Vijay Samant. And Robert Malone basically trolls everyone on this with a great big glowing lion head right over his shoulder. I mean, how much more in your face can it be? It's sort of like, it's just the glowing. It's like this pulsating lion of Indian intelligence right over his shoulder, where Robert Malone writes a book with lions all over it saying, ha, 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 you'll never know who's screwing with you. And then Robert Malone bumps into the alt media success paradox, where he claims to have millions of views but be a victim of censorship. Can't have it both ways, guys. Can't have it both ways, Robert Malone. You're either censored or you're not. And if you have censorship, no one can see you. You can't have 1 million views if you're censored. You just can't. You can't. That means someone allowed it. You can't have it both ways. Anyways, so Peter asked the question, how could Robert Malone, and I think Robert Malone would have been more visible if it wasn't for the failure of, in fact, the Jesse Gelsinger case put Robert Malone into a position of narrative control. I think Robert Malone at this point it was become clear that he needed to keep it quiet a little bit, okay? The fact that he was so involved in setting up that cancer research facility, which is going to be used for cancer data collection and other genomic surveillance of the U.S. military in the event of the biological terror attack, is such a damning thing. Robert Malone didn't join that thing until after the death of Jesse Gelsinger. And I think the death of Jesse Gelsinger created so much doubt and fear about genetic vaccines that they realized that they needed to keep it as quiet as possible for when and if they did have the opportunity to unleash a genetic vaccine on the U.S. military, how they were going to collect the data. So the Winburn Cancer Research Facilities, its entire setup, timeline-wise, coordinates with the death of Jesse Gelsinger. This is the 9/11 story. This is 9/11. How do you use the U.S. military as a healthy group of individuals, the only group of people that are tracked until they die, as experimental test monkeys for genetic vaccines, which is the most important national security initiative in the world? How do you do that? There's your 9/11 story. There's a motive. Timeline, it just keeps lining up. There's no way. The data, and this book is one of the most fantastic examples of it, but you have to see through it a little bit. So, I mean, it took me a while here. I'll fast forward a little bit, and then I think I'll probably continue reading this evening or tomorrow morning. Somewhere in the margins I wrote here, chapter 2 is a whole thing on antibodies, which now means a whole lot more to me now that I understand the antibody patent paradox. You have to go through here and understand what's said and what's not said. And the more I've learned about since I first discovered this book, the more I can now see through it. And with that, I'm only an hour in. I'm sorry about that, but feeling a little exhaustion here. But that was a great question, Peter. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue this later. I'm just going to let my vocal cords relax a little bit. And I really, now that I can pronounce the names properly, and I really wanted to highlight. Oh, yeah, and it says the HIV vaccine, by the way, is going to be an opportunity to create a reusable backbone. And the person that was in the New York Times in the year 1998 talking about how HIV could be a gateway, could provide a reusable platform for the delivery of genes, that was in Verma. The same person that ran the trial about why Jesse Gelsinger died. And this is the part of me where I know I start to sound a little bit xenophobic. I get it. But I couldn't, nothing could be further from the truth. All right? Why is someone from India running, or from England? I don't care if it's India or England or China or Botswana or Peru. Why are non-Americans running the hearings in the United States government, even back in the 1990s, about why Americans are dying of experimental medicine? We already have Americans who are Indians and Chinese, who are Brazilian and Portuguese, who are Christians. And we already have the full color palette here. I don't care. But why are non-American citizens dictating the reality of why American citizens are dying? That just doesn't make any sense. And it's not better if someone, has the Andrew Wakefield British accent. I don't care. In fact, that's even more insulting to suggest that somehow Americans don't notice it or not. And this is what happens when people no longer have control over their own country, when it's been outsourced. So, with that said, I will continue the reading later. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. Hopefully I emphasized. You can feel why I'm reading this book. You can feel why we're still. And now that we found this area, the more we read, the more we just keep learning. So thank you for listening. Thank you. Take care. God bless. I'm going to do a part 2 of this, which I will then combine into one single video for one single consumable. Also, there is already a playlist for this, which I will be updating. If you go to Houstonic ITS and click on the playlists, it's there. I'm going to be reposting all of those. And I don't know if I'm going to keep the Big Shot AIDS vaccine as its own playlist or not. I think I will, simply because it's already there and it's already in the search engines, etc. But it really is about, it's more than just the HIV vaccine. It's a big part of the 9/11 story. And I think that's one of the reasons why I want it available for download, for audio, with the additional narration put in it. There's also a lot of breakout sessions Similar to the Germ series, there's a lot of breakout sessions with deep dives into who Hillary Kaprowski is, who Margaret Liu is. A lot of really incredible people to talk about here. Hillary Kaprowski is a fascinating person. I really had a very negative feeling about him when I first started reading about him. My understanding of him, my appreciation of Hillary Kaprowski has really evolved. It's a lot more nuanced right now than it was back then. Hillary Kaprowski mentioned again in the Big Shot AIDS vaccine book. This is the last thing I'll say today. Anyways, this show. Hillary Kaprowski was already scheduled to talk about an anthrax vaccine in the fall in the United States government, for the United States government in the fall of 2001. But what's really shocking is Hillary Kaprowski was going to talk about an orally administered anthrax vaccine. Almost as if Kaprowski has known. Strange, right? He's the inventor of the oral polio vaccine, right? He's appreciated the difference between oral administration and intramuscular injection for a very long time. Why do you think his polio vaccine worked? Because it was an oral vaccine. It's that simple. And there he was to pitch an orally administered anthrax vaccine in 2001. Thank you, Jonathan J. Cooey, PhD, for all the work you've done on oral versus intramuscular injection of vaccines. And still just comes right out. You can see it all here. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Take care. God bless.